My name's Paul, and I'm going to show you how to make a tongue lock for this trailer that I think is better than anything you can find on the market. It'll sure stop a thief, and I'm going to make it mostly out of scrap parts I had laying around the shop. This is everything I'm going to need to make the lock. I've got a piece of scrap 4x4 tubing, a piece of 4x4 by quarter angle, a 1/2 inch by 5 inch, in this case I'm using a grade 8 bolt and nut. I've got a scrap piece of broken off 1.25 inch bolt. You could use a piece of 1.25 inch or 1 inch pipe for what I'll show you I'm going to do with it, and a good quality padlock, and that's all we'll need to make this trailer lock. The first thing I'm going to do is make sure this tube will fit over the hitch, and I discovered that it's just the hitch is just a hair too wide, and there's some excess flange on either side of the hitch, so I'm going to take a grinder and take about an 1/8 inch off each side, and I think it'll fit just fine after that. And I have to take a little bit more off the back. I'm not going to bore you with that. Now the tube will slide nicely over the hitch and protect it once we get the lock mechanism on there. And I'm going to show you how to do that next. You could also use a piece of round tubing to do this. The square just happened to be what I had laying around the shop, and I think it'll do a nice job. I'm not going to cut it to length yet, and I'll show you why in a minute. Next, I'm going to cut a piece of angle iron 3¼ inches long to fit into the tube, and that will hold the piece of 1¼ inch bolt that'll go up into the hitch that will then lock to the 4x4 tube. So I'll cut this piece of angle off 3½ inches long. All right, I'm going to use this to weld the 1¼ inch bolt onto, and that'll slide into the 4x4 tube. All right, it so happens that the head of this 1¼ inch bolt fits nicely up into the receiver, and you can latch it down and it actually stays there. So what I'm going to do is cut this off and weld it to this piece of angle here, and then that'll slide into the housing, and I'll show you in a minute how that's going to lock into that piece of tube. So what I want to do is mark this bolt and cut it off at the right spot. I've got an old Jorgensen clamp that belonged to my grandfather, and he must have cut these notches in there for holding round things, and it works nicely for strapping this bolt down and getting it ready to cut. Next, I'm going to cut off some excess angle iron, and in a few minutes you'll see that there really is a plan here. So this gives you an approximate cutaway of what will be happening inside the tube. The 1¼ inch bolt will go back up into the receiver of the trailer hitch, and I'm going to weld that to the piece of angle that I cut off, and then that 1/2 inch bolt I will drill a hole all the way through the 4-inch tube and then weld that bolt into place. And after I cut off the 4-inch tube, you'll be able to reach in with your hand and insert the key into the lock to get it in and out, but there's no way that anybody will be able to get a saw or a bolt cutter or a torch or anything into that lock. So the rest of it should be substantial enough that it'll withstand a sledgehammer or anything they can throw at it, pry bar, what have you. So I'm going to finish putting it together and we'll see how it works. Now that I have all the pieces that are going to go inside the tube together, I can mark the length of the tube and also the location of the 1/2-inch bolt. So it turns out that the tube is going to need to be about 12 inches long to hide the lock entirely, and the bolt is going to need to be about 7 3/4 inches back from the end of the tube. So I'll mark those, cut those, drill my holes, and do my welding. I'm rotating the tube as I cut so I can follow the line and get a really nice square end. I'll clean that end up with the grinder so there's no sharp edges. So I've marked the location for the 1/2-inch bolt, and I'll use this punch that also belonged to my grandfather to mark the location. And I'm going to take this inside on the drill press to make it easier, and I'll drill the hole on both sides and also drill the hole in the angle that will receive the lock shackle. I'm going to drill a 1/4 inch or so pilot hole before I drill the larger 1/2-inch hole. All right, and here's the 1/2-inch hole. All right, the bolt fits through just like it's supposed to. I'll put the nut on here. Remember, I'm going to weld this in place. Obviously, you don't want a thief unbolting it, so I'll take it down to the shop and weld it in place, and we'll be good on that part. Okay, I've drilled a hole in the angle to receive the lock shackle, using the same procedure, punching, pre-drilling, and then drilling the 1/2-inch hole. I've put it off center so that it'll be easier to manipulate the lock past the end of the trailer hitch. All right, now I'm going to weld the piece of 1 1/4 bolt to the angle iron. And I'm going to weld the bolt to the tube so that they can't unbolt the bolt that goes through it. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but they're not going to get it off. All right, let's see how it works. Put the bolt head up into the receiver and put that down, and it'll stay up in there. Put the lock shackle through the hole in the angle, and then guide the whole thing through so that the bottom shackle goes underneath the bolt and the lock passes above the bolt. And you can reach in there and snap the lock closed, and there you have it. It's I defy anybody to easily get that off of there. I'll paint it up and have a good solid lock. You can see how the lock sits back up in there. I've got big hands and I can get back in there and manage it pretty well. And I defy anybody to get a bolt cutter, pry bar, sledgehammer, anything back up in there to do any damage to that. I think we've got a good lock here. Besides trimming a little bit off the side of the coupler, I did make one minor modification. This keeper sat up just a little bit too high to get the tube over the coupler, so I trimmed this edge right here to allow it to go deeper into this slot and sit down lower, which I don't think hurts a thing, and that allows the tube to slide very easily over top of the coupler. If you like this lock and you also have a gooseneck trailer, I encourage you to go to my website, jakelock.com, and look at this lock for a gooseneck trailer. It's made out of hardened steel, almost impossible to cut. It prevents the coupler from being locked, but it also locks the coupler to the trailer, so a thief can't come along and steal your coupler and your trailer. So have a look at jakelock.com. So here you have the finished product, an angle with a bolt, or you could use a piece of pipe or anything that will go up into the receiver, and a piece of tube with a bolt running across it in the middle. That's all there is to it. And here it is installed.